Some secrets don't stay buried forever. They just wait for the right moment to surface. For 62-year-old Marnie Elwood, that moment came on an ordinary October morning when her dog Tucker led her to an old oak tree and started digging like his life depended on it. What she found beneath those roots changed everything. A weathered box, a letter inside, and a name she hadn't spoken in 40 years. Someone had buried this for her to find, but why now? And who else knew it was there? What Marnie was about to uncover would force her to face a past she thought she'd left behind forever. A secret about her family, her land, and a promise made long before she was ready to understand it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marnie's hands trembled as she carried the weathered box back toward her cabin, Tucker trotting faithfully beside her. The morning sun had climbed higher now, filtering through the canopy of pines and oaks that formed the cathedral ceiling of her mountain home. Every few steps, she glanced down at the box cradled in her arms, half expecting it to vanish like morning mist. The cabin came into view through the trees, a modest structure of weathered cedar and river stone that had sheltered 3 generations of her family. Smoke curled from the chimney where she'd left the morning fire burning. Her truck sat in the gravel drive, dust-covered and reliable. Beyond the cabin, the Blue Ridge Mountains rolled away in waves of purple and gold, a view that had greeted her every morning for the past 20 years since she'd returned to this place. She climbed the porch steps, her boots echoing on the worn planks. Tucker settled onto his favorite spot by the door, his muzzle gray with age, but his eyes still bright and watchful. Marnie paused at the threshold, looking back at the forest that held so many of her memories. The listening tree stood somewhere beyond the ridge, its ancient roots now disturbed, its secret revealed. Inside, the cabin wrapped around her with familiar comfort. The walls were lined with pine planks that had darkened to honey over the decades. Her grandmother's quilts draped the back of the sofa. Books filled handmade shelves, novels and field guides, poetry and history. The kitchen table, where she'd eaten breakfast as a child, still stood beneath the window, scarred and solid. This was the only home that had ever truly felt like hers. Marnie set the box on the table and stood looking at it. The metal was corroded in places, the lock broken by Tucker's digging. Soil still clung to its edges. She should clean it, she thought, but her hands wouldn't move. Not yet. 20 years ago, when her marriage to David had finally crumbled after 2 decades of trying to make it work, she'd fled back to these mountains. Their daughter Emily had been grown by then, starting her own life in Asheville. The divorce had been quiet, sad, and inevitable. 2 people who'd realized they'd been living parallel lives that never truly intersected. David had been a good man, just not her man. He'd wanted the suburbs and dinner parties and a wife who wanted the same. She'd wanted wilderness and solitude and mornings that tasted like pine. So she'd come home to the land her parents had left her, this cabin and the 15 acres surrounding it, or so she'd thought. Her mother had passed 15 years ago, her father 5 years before that. Both were buried in the town cemetery, their graves marked with simple stones. She visited them every few months, bringing wildflowers in summer, evergreen branches in winter. Her mother had never mentioned a buried box, never hinted at secrets waiting beneath the listening tree. In those final weeks, when cancer had hollowed her out and left only breath and bone, she'd said nothing about this. Marnie pulled out a chair and sat down, her eyes fixed on the box. Tucker padded inside and settled at her feet with a soft groan. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, taking comfort in his warmth. The box wasn't large, perhaps the size of a shoebox, though deeper. She lifted the lid slowly. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had protected them from moisture and time, were 3 items. The first was a photograph, black and white, the edges soft with age. It showed a young couple standing beneath an oak tree. The listening tree, she realized with a start. The woman was her mother, unmistakably, though she couldn't have been more than 25 in the photo. Her dark hair fell to her shoulders, and she wore a simple dress that spoke of the 1960s. She was smiling, but there was something careful in her expression, something held back. The man beside her was tall, with strong features and kind eyes. His hand rested on the tree trunk, proprietary and comfortable. He looked at the camera with confidence, with belonging. Marnie had never seen this man before in her life, yet something in the shape of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, struck her as familiar in a way she couldn't name. Beneath the photograph lay a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Her mother's handwriting marked the front, careful and precise. For Marnie, when you're ready to know. The third item was a hand-drawn map, the paper thick and fibrous, the ink faded but still legible. It showed the surrounding mountains with careful detail, trails she recognized, landmarks she knew. But the property lines marked on it extended far beyond the 15 acres she believed she owned. And in the northeast section, someone had drawn a small X with the words written beside it in her mother's careful script. The truth lies here. Marnie spread the items before her on the table, arranging them like pieces of a puzzle she didn't yet understand how to solve. The photograph drew her eyes again and again. Her mother, young and beautiful and keeping secrets. And the man, who was he? Why had he been important enough to photograph at that particular tree? The afternoon light shifted as clouds moved across the sun. She should eat something. She'd had nothing since her early breakfast of oatmeal and coffee. But hunger felt distant, unimportant. The envelope called to her, whispered promises of answers she wasn't certain she wanted. Her phone rang, shattering the silence. Emily's name lit up the screen. Marnie stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Hey, sweetie." "Mom, hi. I've been thinking about you. How are things up there?" Emily's voice carried the particular tone of concern she'd developed over the years, loving but slightly exasperated, as if Marnie were a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "Things are fine. Tucker and I went for a long walk this morning. The leaves are turning. That's good. Listen, I was thinking I might drive up this weekend." "It's been almost a month since I've seen you." Marnie's eyes fell on the envelope. "This weekend? Is that okay? I know you like your solitude, but I worry about you up there all alone. What if something happened? What if you fell or... Emily, I'm 62, not 90. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. A pause. "I know that, Mom. I just miss you." "Is it so wrong that I want to see my mother?" Guilt pressed against Marnie's chest. Emily had always been a good daughter, even when Marnie knew she'd been a distracted mother, present in body but absent in spirit during those suburban years. Emily deserved better than her defensive tone. "No, of course not. I'm sorry. This weekend would be lovely. Come Saturday morning. I'll make your favorite blueberry pancakes." "Perfect. I love you, Mom." "Love you too, sweetie." After they hung up, Marnie sat in the gathering quiet. Saturday. 3 days away. She looked at the envelope again. Whatever was inside, whatever truth her mother had sealed away, Emily would be here in 3 days. Did she want to open this now alone? Or did she want her daughter beside her when she learned whatever had been hidden for so long? The question answered itself. Some things a woman needed to face alone first, needed to understand in her own time before she could share them. Emily would come Saturday, and by then Marnie would know what to tell her, if anything. She stood and moved to the kitchen, filling the kettle and setting it on the stove. While she waited for the water to boil, she found herself wandering through the cabin, seeing it with new eyes. This had been her grandmother's house first, built by her grandfather in 1945 when he'd returned from the war. Her mother had grown up here, had married her father in the small church down in the valley, had brought Marnie home to this cabin as a baby, and all that time she'd been keeping secrets. Marnie paused at the window that looked out toward the mountains. Somewhere beyond that ridge was the place marked on the map, the spot where truth supposedly waited. She'd hiked most of this land over the years, knew its trails and streams, its clearings and thickets. But the northeast section was rough country, steep and dense. She'd never had reason to explore it thoroughly. The kettle whistled. She made herself chamomile tea, adding honey from the local farm down the road. Tucker lifted his head at the sound of her movements, then settled back into sleep. 15 years old, her faithful companion. She'd found him at the shelter when she'd first moved back, a gangly puppy with oversized paws and soulful eyes. He'd grown into a steady presence, asking nothing more than walks and food and a warm place to sleep. She returned to the table with her tea and sat down again. The afternoon was sliding toward evening. Through the window, she watched a hawk circle lazy patterns against the sky. Marnie had taken up painting when she'd moved back. Landscapes mostly, capturing the mountains in their changing seasons. An easel stood in the corner, a half-finished canvas showing. Autumn colors bleeding across distant ridges. She hadn't touched it in weeks. Before the divorce, she'd been an art teacher at the community college, supplementing David's insurance job. She'd loved teaching, loved watching students discover their own vision. But the work had felt like maintenance, keeping a marriage afloat, keeping a household running, keeping everyone else satisfied while some essential part of herself grew smaller and quieter. Here, in these mountains, that part had begun to breathe again. She painted when the light was right. She hiked when the trails called. She read books that took her weeks to finish, savoring them like good wine. The isolation that worried Emily felt like freedom to Marnie, but now this box had arrived, or rather Tucker had found it, and suddenly she wondered how much of her history she'd understood at all. Had her parents' marriage been what she'd always believed? Her father, stoic and hard-working, who'd managed the small timber business until arthritis forced him to retire. Her mother, gentle and kind, who'd tended her garden and sung hymns while she cooked. They'd seemed solid, stable, devoted to each other in the quiet way of people who'd built a life together through work and sacrifice. What had her mother been hiding? Marnie picked up the photograph again, studying the man's face. His expression held confidence, but also something else. Gentleness, maybe. He looked like someone who laughed easily, who worked with his hands, who belonged in these mountains as completely as the trees themselves. And her mother, captured in that moment beneath the listening tree, looked happy but guarded, as if she knew the camera was recording something that needed to remain secret. The sun touched the western peaks, painting them gold and crimson. Decision time. Marnie picked up the envelope, feeling its weight, the slight thickness that suggested multiple pages inside. Her mother had written those words. When you're ready to know, but how could anyone ever be ready for truths that had been buried for decades? She carried the envelope to the porch, Tucker following behind. They sat together on the steps, watching the day fade. The forest filled with evening sounds, crickets beginning their song, a barred owl calling from the ridge. The air smelled of wood smoke and fallen leaves, and the particular crispness that came with October in the mountains. "What do you think, old friend?" she asked Tucker, scratching behind his ears. "Did you know what you were digging up this morning?" Tucker leaned against her leg, warm and solid and unconcerned, with questions that had no immediate answers. Marnie held the envelope in both hands, feeling the paper that her mother had touched so many years ago. She imagined her mother standing beneath the listening tree, placing this box in the ground, covering it with soil and leaves and time. She would have been alone. This wasn't the kind of secret you shared with witnesses. She would have known that someday, somehow, it would be found. But why the listening tree? The name had come from old-timers in the valley, people who claimed that if you sat quiet beneath its branches, you could hear the mountains speaking. Children were brought there to make wishes. Couples carved their initials into its bark. It was the kind of place where people left prayers and dreams, where the boundary between the ordinary world and something deeper grew thin. Her mother had chosen it deliberately, had marked it on a map, had written instructions, knowing that her daughter would eventually follow them. The last light bled from the sky, leaving stars scattered across the darkening blue. Marnie rose, her knees protesting slightly, a reminder that 62 came with its own messages from the body. She went inside, Tucker trailing behind, and lit the lamps that gave the cabin its warm glow. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow at sunset, she would open the letter. She would read whatever her mother had written, whatever truth had been sealed away. Tonight, she would simply sit with the mystery, letting it settle into her bones. She made herself a simple dinner, soup and bread, though she barely tasted it. Later, she lay in bed listening to the wind move through the pines, Tucker snoring softly in his bed beside hers. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, her dreams were filled with oak trees and buried secrets, with her mother's young face and a stranger's kind eyes, with questions that multiplied like shadows in the forest. The next day passed in a blur of ordinary tasks that felt anything but ordinary. Marnie split firewood, stacked it against the cabin wall for winter. She swept the porch, washed dishes, attempted to read a novel she'd been enjoying just yesterday, but the words slid past without meaning, and she found herself reading the same page 3 times before giving up. The envelope sat on the kitchen table where she'd left it. Patient and inevitable, by late afternoon she could no longer pretend to ignore it. She made herself tea, then changed her mind and poured whiskey instead. Her father's brand, the bottle she kept for cold nights and hard thoughts. She carried it to the porch along with the envelope, settling into the rocking chair her grandfather had built 70 years ago. Tucker joined her, his chin resting on her knee. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. She sipped the whiskey, letting it burn warmth down her throat, and turned the envelope over in her hands. Her mother's handwriting. How many times had she seen it, on grocery lists and birthday cards, on the margins of recipes and the labels of canning jars. Familiar as her own face, ordinary as breath. But now it seemed laden with weight, with intention, with all the words that had never been spoken aloud. Marnie slid her finger under the flap, breaking the seal. The paper tore with a soft sound that seemed too loud in the evening quiet. Inside were 3 pages, covered front and back, in her mother's careful script. She unfolded them with hands that had gone steady, past nervousness now, into a kind of calm acceptance. The date at the top stopped her breath, September 12th, 2009, just weeks before her mother died. "My dearest Marnie," it began, and she could hear her mother's voice in those words, gentle and certain. "If you're reading this, then Tucker, or some other faithful companion, has led you to the place I marked. I've wondered for years whether I was right to leave this for you, whether some truths are better left buried. But in the end, I couldn't bear the thought of leaving this world with so much unsaid, so much unexplained. You deserve to know who you really are." Marnie's hand tightened on the paper. The whiskey glass sat forgotten on the porch rail. "The man in the photograph is James Lockwood. He owned the land adjacent to what we thought of as ours, 200 acres of forest and creek bottom, some of the most beautiful country in these mountains. He was 35 when I met him, a widower whose wife had died in childbirth. I was 24, married to the man you knew as your father for 3 years, trying to make a life work that felt like wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. I don't expect you to understand. How could you, when I barely understood it myself? But I need you to know it wasn't casual, wasn't careless. I loved James Lockwood with everything I had, and he loved me the same way. We tried to stay apart. Lord knows we tried. But the heart doesn't always follow the rules we set for it." Marnie looked up from the letter, staring at the mountains without seeing them. Her mother, gentle, church-going, devoted to her marriage vows, had had an affair. The foundation of what she'd believed about her childhood shifted beneath her. She read on, the words blurring and sharpening as tears gathered in her eyes. The affair lasted 18 months. We would meet in the woods at places where no one would see us. He wanted me to leave to divorce and marry him. He would have taken care of us, would have loved any child as his own. But I was afraid of the scandal, of what people would say, of hurting the man I'd married even though I didn't love him the way a wife should. And then I discovered I was pregnant with you. I hadn't been intimate with my husband in months. He knew the marriage was failing, even if we didn't speak of it. The child could only be James's. I told James first. He was overjoyed, Marnie. He wanted to claim you, to be your father in every way. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't bear the thought of you growing up with whispers following you, with people looking at you and knowing you were born from adultery. So I went to my husband and told him I was pregnant, and to his credit, he accepted it without question. Perhaps he knew the truth. Perhaps he chose not to. Either way, he raised you as his own. James was devastated, but he understood. He loved me enough to let me go, to let you go. And he loved you, this child he would never acknowledge, enough to ensure you would be provided for. He went to his attorney, Vernon Hayes, and created a trust. The land he owned, all 200 acres, would be transferred to you when the time was right, when you were old enough to understand, to choose whether to accept it or not. James died when you were 2 years old, a logging accident that took him quickly. I've lived with that grief every day since. But I've also lived with the knowledge that he left you a gift, a legacy. The land you think of as ours, the cabin and the surrounding property, that was always ours. But the land beyond, the wilderness you've hiked and loved all your life, that belongs to you through James. Marnie set the pages down, unable to read further for a moment. The man she'd called father, the one who'd taught her to fish, who'd been silent and distant but present, he'd known. He'd raised her knowing she wasn't his. The complexity of that kindness, that sacrifice, overwhelmed her. She picked up the whiskey and drank, then forced herself to continue reading. I know this changes everything you believed about yourself, about me, about the man who raised you. I know it's unfair to tell you this now, when I'm no longer here to answer your questions or face your anger. But Vernon Hayes knows the full story. He has all the documents, all the proof. The trust stipulates that you must acknowledge the truth, acknowledge James as your biological father, before you can claim the inheritance. It was his way of ensuring that someday you would know him. I don't know if you'll be able to forgive me for keeping this secret. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, but I want you to understand that everything I did believing it was best for you. I wanted to protect you from shame, from gossip, from growing up with a shadow over your name. What I know now, at the end of my life, is that secrets have their own weight. They press down on your soul until you can barely breathe. I should have told you years ago. I should have trusted you with the truth. The map will lead you to a place James created for you, a place on the land that's yours. I've never been there myself. But Vernon says James left something there, something he wanted you to have. You are James Lockwood's daughter, Marnie. You have his strength, his love of these mountains, his quiet determination. The man who raised you gave you stability and a name, but James gave you roots that run deep into this earth. I hope you can find it in your heart to understand, and perhaps someday to forgive. Whatever you decide about the land, about the legacy James left you, know that both men loved you in their own way. And so did I with everything I had. Your mother, always. Marnie set the letter down, her hands shaking now. The sun had set while she read, leaving the sky streaked with purple and gold. Tucker pressed closer against her leg, sensing her distress. Everything she'd thought she knew about her life, about her identity, had been rewritten in 6 pages of careful script. The man she'd called father wasn't her biological parent. Her mother had loved someone else, had carried that secret for 4 decades. And somewhere out there in the wilderness, she owned land she'd never known was hers. Land left by a father who died loving her from a distance. She thought of all the times she'd walked these mountains, feeling connected to them in a way she couldn't explain. She'd always assumed it was simply love of wild places, an affinity she'd inherited from her father, from the man who'd raised her. But had it been something deeper, something in her blood calling to land that was rightfully hers? The questions multiplied faster than she could process them. Why now, after her mother had been dead for 15 years? Why not tell her while she was alive, when they could have talked about it, worked through it together? And who was Vernon Hayes, this attorney who'd kept the secret all these years? She picked up the photograph again, studying James Lockwood's face with new understanding. Her father, her biological father. She looked for herself in his features, the shape of his jaw, the set of his eyes, the way he stood with such ease in the landscape. Yes, she could see it now. The resemblance had been there all along, waiting for her to have context, to recognize it. Her phone rang inside the cabin. She ignored it, unable to face conversation with anyone. The ringing stopped, then started again, persistent. It would be Emily, checking in like she did most evenings. Marnie stood on unsteady legs and went inside. The phone showed 3 missed calls from her daughter. She stared at Emily's name on the screen, thought about calling back, about sharing this impossible revelation. But what would she say? How did you tell your daughter that everything she knew about her grandfather was incomplete, that her grandmother had secrets that reached back before Emily was even born? She couldn't, not yet. Not until she understood it herself. She typed a quick text instead. All fine, just out walking. Talk tomorrow. The lie felt heavy but necessary. Tomorrow was soon enough for truth. Tonight, she needed to sit with this alone, to let it reshape her understanding of herself and her history. Tucker followed her to bed, where she lay in the darkness. Sleep, impossible. The letter's words echoed in her mind, reordering her memories, casting new light on moments she'd never questioned before. Her father's, no, not her father, the man who'd raised her, his distance now seemed not like coldness, but like restraint. The burden of loving a child who wasn't his, of honoring a promise to a wife whose heart belonged to someone else, and her mother, carrying such weight alone. Never speaking of it, never letting the truth slip. Marnie didn't know whether to admire that strength or resent it. Outside, an owl called through the darkness. The wind moved through the pines like whispered conversation. And somewhere out there, marked on a hand-drawn map, lay more truth waiting to be discovered. Land that was hers, a legacy from a man who'd loved her before she was born. By morning, she would have to decide what to do with this knowledge. Whether to follow the map to its marked destination, whether to contact Vernon Hayes, whether to claim the inheritance that came with acknowledging a father she'd never known. But tonight, she simply lay in the darkness and felt her whole history rearranging itself around this central, buried truth. Dawn came soft and grey, fog settling in the valleys like spilled milk. Marnie had slept perhaps 2 hours, her mind too full of questions to rest properly. She rose with stiff joints and made coffee strong enough to strip paint, standing at the kitchen window while it brewed. The map lay on the table where she'd left it the night before. In daylight, she could see details she'd missed. The careful way her mother had marked elevations, noted landmarks, drawn the boundaries of what was apparently her land. 200 acres. The number felt impossible. She'd thought she owned 15. She spread the map flat, weighing down the corners with her coffee mug and a pair of reading glasses. The marked location was approximately 2 miles northeast, up a ridge she'd climbed once or twice over the years, but never explored thoroughly. The terrain was rough there, steep slopes and rocky outcroppings, dense undergrowth that made walking difficult. Not impossible, but challenging enough that she'd need proper gear, and most of a day. Tucker watched her from his bed, his tail thumping hopefully against the floor. He knew the signs of preparation for a hike, the way she studied maps, the particular energy in her movements. "Not yet, old friend," she told him. "I need to think about this first." But even as she said it, she was pulling out her hiking pack, checking supplies. She'd need water, emergency gear, her first aid kit. The walking stick her father, the man who'd raised her, had carved for her 30th birthday. The irony of using his gift to search for evidence of another father's love didn't escape her. Before she left, she needed information. She needed to understand what she was walking into. The letter had mentioned Vernon Hayes, the attorney who'd created the trust. She found her laptop and searched for his name, half expecting to find he'd died years ago. But no, Vernon Hayes, attorney at law, still maintained an office in the valley town of Millbrook, 20 minutes down the mountain. The website showed a man in his 80s, white-haired and dignified, specializing in estate law and land trusts. Office hours by appointment only. Marnie picked up her phone and dialed before she could talk herself out of it. "Hayes Legal Services," a woman's voice answered, professional and warm. "Yes, hello. My name is Marnie Elwood. I'm calling about a land trust that might have been set up by James Lockwood." I was told Vernon Hayes handled it. A pause. One moment, please. The hold music was classical, something by Mozart that her mother used to hum while cooking. Marnie's throat tightened at the memory. Miss Elwood? A different voice now, male and measured, with the careful diction of someone who'd spent a lifetime choosing words precisely. This is Vernon Hayes. I've been expecting your call, though I wondered if it would ever come. You knew about the box? About my mother's letter? I helped her bury it nearly 16 years ago. She was quite ill by then, but determined. Said the time wasn't right while she lived, but that you'd find it when you were meant to. I see she was correct. Marnie sank into a chair, the phone pressed to her ear. Can you tell me, is it all true? About James Lockwood, about the land. Every word. I have the documents here in my office. Have had them for 40 years. The trust is valid, legal, and waiting for you to claim it. But there are things we should discuss in person, Miss Elwood. Things your mother's letter couldn't fully explain. Could you come to my office this afternoon? Say 2 o'clock? She looked at the map, at Tucker watching her with patient eyes, at the morning light that promised fair weather for hiking. The marked location would still be there tomorrow. Understanding the full legal situation seemed more urgent now. Yes, 2 o'clock. I'll be there. Good. And Miss Elwood? Don't worry. James Lockwood made sure everything was done properly. He wanted you protected, provided for. He was a good man. After they hung up, Marnie sat in the quiet cabin processing this new information. Vernon Hayes had known her mother, had helped bury the box. He'd kept this secret for decades. The scope of the conspiracy, if it could be called that, overwhelmed her. How many people had known the truth about her parentage while she'd lived in ignorance? She decided to go into town early, to give herself time before the appointment. She needed normalcy, needed to ground herself in the ordinary world before diving deeper into revelations. Dalton's general store would be open. It had been a fixture in the valley for as long as she could remember. Roy Dalton, who ran it now, had known her parents. Maybe he'd known James Lockwood too. She dressed in clean jeans and a flannel shirt, fed Tucker, and loaded him into her truck. The drive down the mountain road was one she'd made thousands of times. The curves and switchbacks as familiar as her own heartbeat. Morning fog still clung to the hollows, burning off slowly as the sun climbed higher. Millbrook hadn't changed much in 40 years. Main Street still had the same brick storefronts, the same oak trees lining the sidewalks. The diner where she'd eaten grilled cheese sandwiches as a child. The library where she'd spent summer afternoons. The church where her mother had sung in the choir every Sunday. She parked in front of Dalton's, leaving the windows cracked for Tucker. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and Roy Dalton looked up from behind the counter. He was 70-something now, his hair white as snow but his eyes still sharp. Marnie Elwood. Haven't seen you in a couple weeks. Everything all right up at the cabin? Everything's fine, Roy, just needed some supplies. She grabbed a basket and wandered the aisles, picking up things she didn't really need. Coffee she had plenty of. Bread that would go stale before she finished it. But the normalcy of shopping settled her nerves. At the counter, Roy rang up her purchases with practiced efficiency. Heard we might get an early snow this year. You got enough firewood laid in? I'm working on it. She hesitated, then plunged ahead. Roy, did you ever know a man named James Lockwood? Would have been back in the 60s, 70s. Roy's hand stilled on the register. James Lockwood. Now there's a name I haven't heard in years. Sure, I knew him. Good man. Owned a fair piece of land up near your place, if I remember right. Died in a logging accident. Had to be 40 years ago now. Tragic that was. He was young, not even 40. Why do you ask? I've been doing some research into the area's history. His name came up. Roy nodded, accepting this. He was well-liked, James. Always helped folks out when they needed it. I remember my daddy saying James gave him lumber once when our barn roof needed fixing, wouldn't take payment. That kind of man. He'd been sweet on someone before he died. There was talk, you know how small towns are. But nothing ever came of it that I knew about. Marnie's pulse quickened. Sweet on someone? Oh, you know how it is. A young widow, a pretty woman who was married to someone else. People notice these things. But James was a gentleman. Whatever his feelings were, he kept them proper. Roy handed her the receipt. Shame he died so young. Would have been nice to see what he could have built up there. She thanked him and carried her bags to the truck, her mind racing. So there had been talk, even back then. Whispers and speculation that her mother and James had been more than neighbors. The truth had been hiding in plain sight all these years, dressed up as gossip that no one quite believed. Tucker greeted her with enthusiasm, as if she'd been gone for hours rather than minutes. She scratched his ears and checked her watch. Still 2 hours until her appointment with Vernon Hayes. She drove to the town park and walked Tucker along the creek, letting the sound of moving water calm her thoughts. The creek ran cold and clear over smooth stones. The same creek that wound through the property she apparently owned. She'd played here as a child, wading in the shallows while her mother watched from the bank. Had her mother thought of James then? Had every moment in these mountains carried the weight of her secret? At 1:45, she returned to Main Street and found Vernon Hayes's office in a converted Victorian house, painted pale yellow. A small brass plaque by the door read, "Hayes Legal Services, established 1978. She climbed the porch steps and knocked. Vernon Hayes himself answered, tall and spare, with the kind of dignity that came from a lifetime of keeping confidences. His handshake was firm, his eyes kind. "Miss Elwood, please come in." His office was lined with law books and filing cabinets, everything neat and precisely organized. He gestured her to a leather chair across from his desk and settled into his own seat with the careful movements of age. "I've been the executor of James Lockwood's, our trust, for 40 years, he began without preamble. "I was his attorney and his friend. When he died, I promised him I'd see his wishes carried out, no matter how long it took. I promised your mother the same thing." He opened a file drawer and withdrew a thick folder, setting it on the desk between them. "These are the trust documents, the deed transfers, everything legal and binding. When you're ready, I'll walk you through each page. But first, I think you deserve to understand the full story, not just the legal framework, but the human one." Vernon Hayes leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "James came to me in the spring of 1983. He was distraught, a word I don't use lightly. The woman he loved was pregnant with his child, but she'd decided to stay with her husband, to raise the baby as part of her marriage. James understood her reasons, even respected them. But he couldn't bear the thought of his child growing up without provision, without inheritance. So he created the trust," Marnie said quietly. "More than that. He restructured his entire estate. The land he owned, 200 acres of prime mountain property, he put into an irrevocable trust with specific conditions. The land would pass to his biological daughter when she was ready to acknowledge him as her father. Until then, it would be held in trust, managed to prevent development or sale. He wanted to ensure you'd inherit wilderness, not subdivisions." Marnie's throat tightened. "He never even met me. No, he died when you were 2 years old. But he loved you from the moment he knew you existed. I saw it in his eyes when he talked about you, this child he'd never hold, never watch grow up. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I'd see the trust through, that someday you'd know he'd been your father, and that he'd tried to give you something permanent." Vernon pulled out a document, pushing it across the desk. "This is the trust instrument. It's valid, legal, and waiting for your signature. But there are conditions. You must legally acknowledge James Lockwood as your biological father. That acknowledgement becomes part of the public record. Once you do, the land transfers to you completely, no restrictions, no ongoing trust obligations. And if I don't acknowledge him, the land remains in trust indefinitely. Upon your death, it transfers to the state for conservation purposes. James wanted you to have it, but he also wanted you to know the truth. He believed truth mattered more than convenience." Marnie studied the document, the legal language swimming before her eyes. "What about the man who raised me? Did he know about this?" Vernon's expression softened. "I believe he did, though it was never discussed explicitly. Your mother came to me alone when she was pregnant, desperate and scared. But I think she told him, or he figured it out. He chose to raise you as his own anyway. That took tremendous character. 200 acres, Marnie said, still trying to grasp the scope. That's the land northeast of my cabin. Yes, it borders your existing property, the land your parents actually owned. James specifically chose acreage that would connect to theirs, so you'd have one contiguous piece. He thought about every detail. Vernon reached into the folder again and withdrew an old envelope sealed with wax. He left this for you as well. I've never opened it. It's addressed to you specifically. He wrote it the week before he died. Marnie took the envelope with trembling hands. Her name was written across the front in strong, confident script, for my daughter Marnie. There's one more thing, Vernon said gently. The map your mother left you, it marks a specific location on the property. James built something there, a small structure to protect items he wanted you to have. Personal effects, photographs, his journals. He wanted you to know him, even though he couldn't be there to tell you himself. Where exactly? Near the old spring, about 2 miles into the property. There's a clearing with a rock formation. Locals used to call it Hawk's Watch, because you could see for miles. James had a hunting cabin there once. That's where you'll find what he left. Marnie looked at the envelope in her hands, at the trust documents, at this elderly attorney who'd kept faith with a promise for 4 decades. Why now? Why did my mother wait until after she died to tell me? She was afraid, Vernon said simply. Afraid of your judgment, afraid of disrupting your life, afraid of the gossip that might resurface. She thought, perhaps wrongly, that it would be easier for you to discover this after she was gone, so you could process it without having to confront her directly. That seems like the coward's way, perhaps. Or perhaps it was a mother trying to protect her daughter one last time, even from the truth about herself. Vernon's eyes held compassion. She loved you deeply, Marnie. Every decision she made believing it was best for you. We can debate whether she was right, but her motives were pure. Marnie stood, tucking the envelope into her jacket pocket. I need time to think about all this. The acknowledgement, the land, everything, of course. But there is a time constraint. The trust stipulates you must claim the inheritance within 1 year of discovering its existence. Your mother documented the date she buried the box. That gives you until October of next year to decide. A year. That's not much time. James wanted to ensure the decision was made while you were still active enough to enjoy the land, to use it. He didn't want this dragging on for decades. Vernon stood as well, extending his hand. I know this is overwhelming, but I've watched over this trust for 40 years, and I'm glad to finally see it coming to fruition. James was a good friend. I'm honored to help fulfill his wishes. Marnie shook his hand, feeling the strength still in his grip despite his age. Thank you for keeping faith with him. It's been my privilege. She walked out into the afternoon sunlight, her head spinning. Tucker greeted her with his usual enthusiasm, and she stood by the truck for a moment, just breathing, letting the autumn air clear her thoughts. 200 acres. A father she'd never known. A legacy built on love and loss and secrets kept for the best of intentions, or the worst. She didn't know yet which it was. She drove back up the mountain slowly, in no hurry to arrive. The road climbed through forests blazing with fall color, past farms where cattle grazed in golden afternoon light. This land, these mountains, they were in her blood in ways she was only beginning to understand. At home, she fed Tucker and made herself tea she didn't drink. The envelope from James sat on the table beside her mother's letter. 2 parents, 2 confessions, 2 truths that rewrote everything she thought she knew. But she couldn't bring herself to open James's letter yet. Not today. Today had held enough revelations. Instead, she spread out the map again, studying the marked location. Hawk's Watch, 2 miles through rough country. She'd need to go there, needed to see what James had left for her. But first, she needed rest, needed to let her mind settle around these new truths. Emily would be here Saturday, 2 days away. Marnie would have to decide by then what to tell her daughter, whether to share these secrets or keep them buried a while longer. The thought of adding more lies to the foundation of deception her mother had built made her sick. But the thought of unloading this complicated history on Emily felt cruel. She went to bed early, exhausted by emotion more than physical effort. But sleep wouldn't come. She lay in the darkness thinking about James Lockwood, this man who'd loved her mother, who'd created a trust to provide for a child he'd never hold, who'd died young with so much unfinished. Around midnight, she rose and lit a lamp. She couldn't wait any longer. She needed to hear his voice, even if only through words written 40 years ago. She opened the envelope carefully, sliding out 2 pages of heavy paper covered in that same confident script she'd seen on the outside. The date at the top was July 15th, 1985, 5 days before he died. "My dear daughter," it began, and Marnie's eyes filled with tears at those 3 words. "I'm writing this knowing I'll never meet you, never watch you grow, never have the chance to be the father you deserve. The accident that will take my life happens in 5 days. I don't know that, of course, but by the time you read this, I'll be long gone. So these words must stand in place of all the conversations we'll never have. I want you to know that you were wanted, that from the moment I learned of your existence, you were loved completely and without reservation. Your mother and I made choices that seemed right at the time, choices meant to protect you from gossip and shame. I don't know if they were the right choices. I only know they were made from love," Marnie read on, her tears falling freely now, and in James Lockwood's words. She began to understand the man who'd been her father in blood, if not in name. Morning came grey and cold, the first real hint of winter on the wind. Marnie woke with James's letter still clutched in her hand, the lamp burned down to nothing. She'd read it 3 times before finally falling asleep near dawn. And even now his words echoed in her mind. He'd written about the land, about why he'd chosen those particular acres. "The high meadow where wildflowers bloom in June, I want you to see that. The creek that runs silver over granite, I want you to drink from it. The ridge where hawks nest every spring, I want you to know that's sky. This land is my gift to you, the only inheritance I can leave. Protect it, love it. Let it remind you that you came from love, even if circumstances kept us apart." She rose stiffly, her body aching from tension and restless sleep. Tucker watched her with concern, sensing her emotional state. She fed him, made coffee, tried to eat toast that tasted like cardboard. Tomorrow Emily would arrive, expecting pancakes and easy conversation. Marnie had less than 24 hours to decide what to tell her daughter. The truth felt too heavy to carry alone any longer, but it also felt like betrayal of her mother's memory, of the man who'd raised her, of the comfortable fiction her family had maintained for 40 years. Once she spoke the words aloud, there would be no taking them back. She needed to see the place James had prepared for her, needed to stand on the land he'd left, to touch the things he'd saved. Maybe then she'd know what to do. She packed her hiking gear with more care than usual, extra water, first aid supplies, emergency shelter. The terrain to Hawk's Watch was challenging, and she'd be alone except for Tucker. Her phone had spotty service in the mountains, but she carried it anyway, fully charged. The morning was well advanced by the time she set out, Tucker ranging ahead on the trail. The forest was quiet, except for the scrunch of leaves under her boots and the occasional call of a crow. She followed the map her mother had drawn, checking landmarks against the terrain. The first mile was familiar, trails she'd hiked countless times. But then the map led her off the established path into rougher country. The slope steepened, requiring her to use her hands in places, pulling herself up using tree roots and rock outcroppings. Tucker managed better than she did, his 4 legs and lower center of gravity giving him advantage. By noon, she'd covered perhaps 1.5 miles. Her legs ached, and she was breathing hard. She stopped to rest on a fallen log, drinking water and sharing her sandwich with Tucker. From here she could see the valley below, the patchwork of fields and forest, the silver thread of the creek. Her cabin was invisible, tucked into the trees, but she knew where it sat, home, the only real home she'd ever known, and all around her, as far as she could see, was land that belonged to her. 200 acres of wilderness that James Lockwood had preserved for a daughter he'd never met. The scope of that gift, the faith it required, staggered her. She pressed on, following the map's careful notations. The terrain grew rockier, the trees thinning as she climbed higher. And then, rounding a boulder the size of a small house, she saw it, a clearing with a view that stretched for miles, hawks circling lazy patterns against the blue sky. Hawk's Watch. In the center of the clearing stood a small stone structure, no bigger than a garden shed. The roof had been built to withstand weather, covered in slate that had weathered to silver gray. A heavy wooden door, reinforced with iron, secured the entrance. And beside the door, a loose stone at shoulder height. Marnie's hands shook as she moved the stone. Behind it was a small cavity, and inside that cavity, wrapped in oilcloth, was a key. The metal was rusted but intact, and when she fitted it into the lock, it turned with surprising ease. Someone had maintained this, oiled the mechanism, kept the structure sound. Vernon Hayes, perhaps, honoring his promise to James. The door swung open on smooth hinges. Inside, the space was dry and surprisingly well preserved. Sunlight filtered through a small window, illuminating what James had left for her. There were wooden shelves along one wall, holding mason jars filled with items protected from moisture. Photographs, dozens of them. She lifted one jar carefully, opening it to withdraw the pictures inside. James as a young man, standing beside a truck. James, with his arm around a woman, not Marnie's mother, someone else, perhaps the wife who'd died. James holding a baby, a son. The realization struck her like a fist. She'd been so focused on her own parentage that she'd never considered James might have had other children. She sat down hard on the floor, the photograph trembling in her hands. A baby boy, perhaps 2 or 3 years old, grinning at the camera while James held him with obvious love. If James had a son, where was he now? Why hadn't he been mentioned in the trust? She dug through the other jars frantically, looking for answers. More photographs showed the boy at different ages. A toddler, then maybe 5 or 6. Always with James, always clearly loved. But then the photo stopped. No more pictures of the child. In another jar she found documents. A birth certificate for Michael James Lockwood, born 1978. A custody document showing the mother, someone named Linda Barton, had taken the child after their separation in 1981. A letter from a private investigator, dated 1982, stating he'd been unable to locate Linda Barton or the child Michael. James had lost his son, had searched for him and failed to find him, and then he'd discovered he'd have another child, Marnie, but one he couldn't claim. The tragedy of it broke her heart. She found his journals, 3 of them, bound in leather. She opened the most recent one, dated from the last year of his life. The entries were spare but powerful. April 12th, 1984. Still no word on Michael. I dream about him every night. Wonder if he knows I'm looking, if he remembers me at all. He'd be 6 now, starting school. Does his mother tell him about me? Or has she erased me completely? May 3, 1984. Saw Marnie today from a distance. She was playing in her yard while her mother hung laundry. She has my coloring, my build. I wanted so badly to go to her, to pick her up, to tell her who I am. Instead, I watched through binoculars like some kind of criminal. This is the price of the choices we made. June 20th, 1984, created the trust today with Vernon. If I can't be a father to my children in life, at least I can provide for Marnie after I'm gone. Michael is out there somewhere, and if he ever comes looking, Vernon knows to split everything equally. But for now, all I can do is ensure Marnie has what she deserves. Marnie's vision blurred with tears. James had lost one child and couldn't claim the other. He died with that grief, with that longing. And he tried to make it right the only way he could. Through land, through legacy, through careful planning with an attorney who'd keep faith with his wishes. She wiped her eyes and continued exploring the shelter. There were more personal items. His favorite fishing rod, a compass that had belonged to his father, a pocket watch that no longer kept time. Each item carefully labeled, explained in notes written in his strong hand. My father gave me this compass. It brought me home through many storms. May it guide you as well. The afternoon was fading by the time she'd examined everything. She packed the most important items carefully. The journals, the photographs, the birth certificate. She'd need to research Michael Lockwood, try to discover what had happened to James's son. Her half-brother. she realized with a start. Somewhere out there, she might have a brother she'd never known existed. Tucker had been patient, but now he was restless, ready to return home. She locked the shelter carefully, replaced the key in its hiding place, and began the hike back down the mountain. Her mind raced with questions. Why hadn't Vernon mentioned Michael? Was he dead? Still lost? And what did it mean for the trust if James had had another heir? The sun was setting by the time she reached her cabin, exhausted and emotionally drained. She fed Tucker, then herself, soup from a can that she barely tasted. She spread James's journals on the table beside her mother's letter, creating a timeline of events, trying to piece together the full story. James had been married young, had a son named Michael. His wife had died. The journals mentioned it briefly, grief still raw years later. He'd tried to raise Michael alone, but Linda Barton, perhaps a girlfriend, had taken the child and disappeared. Then he'd met Marnie's mother, had fallen in love, had hoped for a future that circumstances denied him. He died at 38, leaving behind 2 children he'd never truly known. The phone rang. Emily. Mom, just confirming, I'll be there tomorrow morning around 10. Does that still work? Marnie looked at the papers spread before her, at the evidence of secrets and lost family members and complicated truths. Yes, she heard herself say. 10 is perfect. Great, I'm really looking forward to it. It feels like forever since we've had quality time together. After they hung up, Marnie sat in the quiet cabin, wondering how to begin. How did you tell your daughter that her grandmother had an affair? That her grandfather wasn't biologically related? That somewhere out there, they might have an uncle no one had ever mentioned? The truth demanded to be told, but the telling of it, that required courage, Marnie wasn't sure she possessed. Emily arrived precisely at 10, pulling up in her sensible sedan with a cooler of groceries in the back seat. She'd inherited her grandmother's practical nature, her ability to organize and plan. Watching her daughter climb out of the car, Marnie felt a wave of love so strong it nearly buckled her knees. Mom. Emily swept her into a hug that smelled like the lavender soap she'd used since college. You look tired. Have you been sleeping okay? Well enough. The lie came easily, too easily. Come in. I've got coffee on. They settled into the familiar rhythm of their visits. Emily unpacking groceries, chattering about her work as a school counselor, filling the cabin with the easy energy of someone comfortable in their own skin. Marnie made pancakes as promised, watching her daughter eat with the satisfaction that came from feeding those you loved. But the artifacts sat in Marnie's bedroom, carefully hidden in a drawer. The truth pressed against her chest with every casual word, every ordinary moment. Finally, after they'd cleaned up breakfast and were sitting on the porch with fresh coffee, Marnie couldn't hold it any longer. Emily, there's something I need to tell you. Something I learned this week that changes. Well, it changes everything I thought I knew about my family. About your grandmother. Emily set down her mug, her expression shifting to concern. What is it? Are you okay? I'm fine. But this is complicated, and I need you to just listen for a bit. Can you do that? Of course. Marnie began with Tucker's discovery at the listening tree, unfolding the story carefully. Emily listened without interrupting, her face moving through expressions of surprise, disbelief, and finally, understanding. When Marnie finished, Emily sat quietly for a long moment. So Grandpa, the man I called Grandpa, he wasn't actually your biological father. No. But he was my father in every way that mattered. He raised me, provided for me, loved me as his own. And this James Lockwood, your biological father, left you 200 acres of land? Yes, with conditions. I have to legally acknowledge him as my father. Public record. It's all tied up in a trust that's been waiting for 40 years. Emily stood and walked to the porch railing, looking out at the mountains. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about this. Angry at Grandma for lying? Sad for Grandpa, who raised a child that wasn't his? Grateful to this James for leaving you land? She turned back to Marnie. What do you feel? All of it, Marnie admitted. Everything at once. And there's more. She told Emily about Michael, about James's lost son, about the photographs and journals she'd found at Hawk's Watch. So you might have a half-brother somewhere? One who could have claim to the land? I don't know. Vernon Hayes, the attorney, never mentioned him, but James's journals make it clear he wanted to provide for both his children if they ever surfaced. The trust might be more complicated than I thought. Emily returned to her chair, processing this flood of information. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. I have until next October to decide whether to claim the inheritance. But claiming it means acknowledging James publicly, which feels like betraying the man who raised me. But he knew, didn't he? If what you're saying is true, he knew you weren't his biological daughter and chose to be your father anyway. That's not betrayal, Mom. That's honoring the choice he made. The simplicity of Emily's logic struck Marnie with force. Her daughter was right. The man who'd raised her had made a conscious choice to be her father. Acknowledging James didn't diminish that. It might even honor it by recognizing the sacrifice he'd made. When did you get so wise? Marnie asked, her voice thick. I learned from watching you, even when you didn't think I was paying attention. Emily reached across the space between their chairs and took Marnie's hand. I want to see the shelter. I want to read the journals. Can we go there today? They set out after lunch, Emily's energy making the difficult hike seem easier than it had the day before. Tucker led the way, pleased to have company. At Hawk's Watch, Emily stood in the clearing with her hands on her hips, taking in the view. This is incredible. I can see why he wanted you to have it. Inside the shelter, Emily examined each artifact with the careful attention of someone who understood their significance. She held the photograph of young Michael, studying his face. He looks happy here. With his father, James lost him, spent years searching and never found him. That's heartbreaking. Emily set down the photo carefully. Have you tried to find him? Michael? Not yet. I wasn't sure I should. What if he doesn't know about James? What if he's built a life that doesn't include this history? Or what if he's been looking for answers his whole life, just like you? Emily opened one of the journals, reading a few entries. These are beautiful, Mom. He really loved you, even though he never met you, and he clearly adored Michael. They spent the afternoon at the shelter, reading through James's journals together. He'd written about the land, about his hopes for his children, about the ache of loving people he couldn't claim. His words painted a picture of a man who'd carried loss with dignity, who'd tried to build something good from complicated circumstances. As they hiked back down, as evening approached, Emily asked, Are you going to try to find Michael? I think I have to. Even if it complicates the trust, even if it means sharing the inheritance. He deserves to know about his father, to know James never stopped looking for him. I can help. I'm pretty good at internet research. Between the two of us, we might be able to track him down. Back at the cabin, they made dinner together, pasta and salad, simple and comforting. Over wine, Emily asked about the land itself, about what Marnie planned to do with 200 acres if she claimed them. I'd protect them, Marnie said without hesitation. Keep them wild the way James wanted. Maybe create trails, but nothing developed. This land should stay as it is. That's good. That's right. Emily swirled her wine, thoughtful. You know, when I was growing up, you always seemed like you were somewhere else. Like you were present, but not really there. I used to think you didn't love me as much as other moms loved their kids. Marnie's heart clenched. Emily, no, let me finish. I understand now. You were trying to fit into a life that didn't fit you. The suburbs, the marriage, all of it. You were doing what you thought you were supposed to do, just like Grandma did. But you weren't happy. Not until you came back here. I always loved you. I'm sorry if I made you doubt that. I know. I know that now. And I'm glad you found your way back to yourself. These mountains, they're who you are. They're in your blood in ways I never understood before. Emily smiled. Literally, apparently. James's blood, your mother's blood, all these generations connected to this place. They spent the evening researching Michael Lockwood online, but found little. No social media presence, no obvious trail. It was as if he'd disappeared completely after 1981, when his mother had taken him. We need more information, Emily said finally. Birth records, school enrollment, something that gives us a starting point. Vernon Hayes might know more. Or at least he might have resources we don't. Call him Monday. Tell him you want to find Michael before you make any decisions about the trust. Emily stayed, through Sunday, and they fell into an easy companionship that reminded Marnie of the closeness they'd shared when Emily was young, before teenage years and adult preoccupations had created distance. They hiked familiar trails, cooked meals together, talked about everything and nothing. Sunday afternoon, as Emily packed to leave, she hugged Marnie tightly. "Thank you for telling me, for trusting me with this. You're my daughter. You deserve to know. And whatever you decide about the land, about acknowledging James, I support you. But I think—" Emily paused, choosing words carefully. "I think secrets have caused enough pain in this family. Maybe it's time for the truth, all of it, to finally come out." After Emily left, the cabin felt emptier than usual. But it was a different kind of empty than loneliness. It was the space left by honesty, by sharing burdens that had been too heavy to carry alone. Marnie called Vernon Hayes first thing Monday morning. "Mr. Hayes, it's Marnie Elwood. I need to ask you about Michael Lockwood." A long pause. "Ah, you found the photographs, and the birth certificate, and James's journals. Why didn't you mention him?" "Because I have no idea where he is, or even if he's alive. James searched for years. I continued that search after he died, hired investigators, followed every lead. Michael vanished completely. His mother remarried, changed their names, covered her tracks deliberately. She didn't want to be found. But if Michael is alive, he has as much claim to the trust as I do. Legally, yes. The trust stipulates that if both children come forward, the estate is divided equally. But Marnie, it's been 40 years. If Michael wanted to be found, there would be a trail. I have to believe he's either deceased or has chosen to remain hidden, or he doesn't know James was looking for him. He might not even know about the trust." "That's possible," Vernon acknowledged. "What are you suggesting?" "I want to find him. Before I claim anything, before I make any decisions, I want to know if my brother is out there." "Can you help me?" Vernon was quiet for a moment. "I kept all the investigative reports. I'll send them to you. But Marnie, don't get your hopes up. Better people than me have tried to find Michael Lockwood. He's a ghost. Then maybe it's time for a ghost to come home." The investigative reports arrived by courier 2 days later, a thick package containing decades of dead ends and false leads. Marnie spread them across her kitchen table, creating a timeline of Michael Lockwood's disappearance. 81. Linda Barton takes 3-year-old Michael and leaves James. No forwarding address, no contact information. 282. James hires first investigator. Trail leads to Texas, then goes cold. 1983, 1984. Multiple investigators. Multiple states. Brief sightings that lead nowhere. 85. James dies. Vernon Hayes continues the search. 90, 2000. Periodic investigations yield nothing. Michael Lockwood has effectively vanished. Tasdawan present. No active investigation. Case considered cold. Marnie studied the few photographs of Michael, a toddler with James's features, his father's build, even at that young age. If he was alive now, he'd be in his late 40s. He could be anywhere, anyone. "How did you find someone who'd been hidden for 40 years? Emily called every evening, offering encouragement and help. Together, they'd created social media posts, carefully worded to respect privacy while seeking information. Searching for Michael James Lockwood, born 1978, last seen in North Carolina area. Family matters, important inheritance. Please contact if you have information." The responses came quickly, dozens of them, mostly from people trying to be helpful, but with no real information. A few were clearly scams, people claiming to be Michael and asking for money. Marnie deleted those immediately. And then, on the 5th day after she'd posted the search, she received a message that made her hands shake. "Ms. Elwood, my name is Judith Mercer. I was James Lockwood's cousin. I've been tending his grave for 40 years. I think we should talk." Marnie called the number immediately. A woman answered on the second ring, her voice aged but strong. "Miss Elwood, thank goodness. I've been hoping someone would finally start asking questions about James. You knew him. He was family. We were close, especially after his wife died, and he was raising Michael alone. I watched that boy grow from a baby to a toddler. Beautiful child, looked just like his daddy. Do you know what happened to him? Where Linda took him?" "No." Linda was troubled, that one. "Jealous, possessive. When James met your mother, well, Linda couldn't stand it. She took Michael in the middle of the night and disappeared. James was destroyed. Marnie's throat tightened. I'm trying to find Michael now. Before I claim the inheritance, James left. It should be shared between us. That's honorable of you. James would appreciate that. Judith paused. There's something else you should know. Something I wasn't sure I should tell anyone, but now with you searching, it seems right. What is it? About 3 weeks ago, a man came to the cemetery. I was there tending the graves like I do every week. He stood at James's headstone for a long time, just staring at it. When I approached him, he looked startled, almost guilty. I asked if he'd known James. He said no, that he was just researching local history. But Miss Elwood, he looked so much like James, it took my breath away. Marnie's heart hammered. Did you get his name? He wouldn't give it. Just thanked me and left quickly. But he was driving a truck with Montana plates. I wrote down the license number, thinking it was odd. Hold on, let me find it. Marnie grabbed a pen with shaking hands and wrote down the number Judith recited. There's more, Judith continued. 2 days later, someone went through the county land records office asking about the Lockwood property. The clerk mentioned it to me. Small town, word travels. She said it was a man in his 40s, asking specific questions about trusts and inheritance laws. Did she get a name? No. He paid cash for copies of documents and left. But she said he seemed agitated, like he was racing against time. After they hung up, Marnie sat stunned. Could it be Michael? Had he somehow learned about James, about the trust, and come searching? If so, why not contact Vernon Hayes directly? Why visit the cemetery in secret and dig through county records anonymously? She called Emily immediately, explaining what Judith had told her. Mom, this could be him, your brother, or it could be someone else who learned about the trust. Someone looking to make a claim. Either way, we need to find out. Can you run that license plate? I don't know how. I do. I have a friend who works for the DMV. Let me make some calls. While waiting, Marnie contacted Vernon Hayes and relayed Judith's information. His response was measured but concerned. If it is Michael, why wouldn't he come forward properly? And if it's not Michael, we need to know who's investigating the trust and why. What if it is him, but he doesn't trust the legal system? What if his mother spent 40 years telling him James abandoned him? He might not know what to believe. That's possible. But Marnie, you need to be careful. 200 acres of mountain property, that's valuable. Add in the mineral rights James protected, and you're talking about potential millions. That kind of money attracts people with bad intentions. Mineral rights. But this was the first she'd heard of it, Vernon sighed. I was going to mention it when you came in to sign the trust documents. The land has rare earth mineral deposits. James knew about them. That's partly why he was so determined to protect the property. He didn't want it mined, didn't want the mountains torn up. But the rights exist, and they're valuable. Marnie felt the ground shifting beneath her again. How valuable? Potentially 7 figures, depending on market conditions. James's will specifies the land can't be developed or mined without unanimous consent of all heirs. He wanted to ensure it stayed wild. But someone determined enough could challenge that in court. The phone beeped. Emily calling back. Vernon, I need to take this. I'll call you back. She switched lines. Emily? Mom, I got it. The truck is registered to a Michael Barrett in Billings, Montana. But here's the interesting part. I did some digging. Michael Barrett changed his name legally in 1995. His birth name was Michael James Lockwood. The room tilted. Marnie gripped the edge of the table. It's him. He's alive. More than that, Mom. He's been looking for information about James. I found online searches in genealogy databases, court records requests. He's been searching for years, just like James searched for him. Then why not come forward? Why investigate in secret? I don't know. But we need to find out. I'm driving up tomorrow. We're going to figure this out together. That night, Marnie couldn't sleep. Michael was alive? Her brother, half-brother, was out there, had been to his father's grave, was searching for answers just like she was. But something held him back from claiming his inheritance openly. She read through James's journals again, looking for clues. One entry stood out, written just months before he died, Michael's 3rd birthday today. Wherever he is, I hope Linda at least tells him about me. Tells him he had a father who loved him. I hope she doesn't poison him against me. A child shouldn't grow up hating a parent he never knew. What if that's exactly what had happened? What if Linda had spent Michael's childhood telling him James was a bad man who'd abandoned them? He might be torn now, wanting to know the truth, but not trusting anything about his father's legacy. Or worse, what if Michael thought the inheritance was tainted somehow? Money from a father who'd supposedly abandoned him, who'd let him grow up without knowing his real name, his real history. The questions multiplied through the night. By dawn, Marnie had made a decision. She would find Michael Barrett, Michael Lockwood, and she would tell him the truth, all of it. He deserved to know that James had never stopped looking, had never stopped loving him. Emily arrived by noon, energized and determined. I found more information. Michael Barrett, our Michael, is a land management attorney in Montana. He specializes in conservation law, protecting wilderness areas from development. He followed in James's footsteps without even knowing it, Marnie said softly. James loved this land, wanted to protect it, and Michael became an attorney who does exactly that. It's more than coincidence, Mom. It's in his blood, just like it's in yours. They spent the afternoon planning. Emily drafted a careful letter, explaining who they were and inviting Michael to meet them. They debated whether to mention the inheritance directly or wait until they'd established contact. Tell him everything, Marnie decided. He's been searching for truth. We should give it to him straight, no games, no secrets. Enough of that. Emily printed the letter, addressed it to Michael Barrett in Billings. But before they could mail it, Marnie's phone rang. Unknown number, Ms. Elwood. The man's voice, careful and measured. My name is Michael Barrett. I think you've been looking for me. And I've been looking for you, Marnie's breath caught. Emily grabbed her hand, listening. Mr. Barrett, Michael, yes. Yes, I've been searching. You're James Lockwood's son, and you're his daughter. My half-sister. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. I've known about the trust for 2 years. Found out when I was researching property law for a client. Saw the Lockwood name, started digging. Discovered I had a father I'd never known, and that he'd left something for his children. For us. Why didn't you come forward? A long pause. Because my mother spent my entire childhood telling me my father was a monster who'd abandoned us. Said he'd chosen someone else over me, over her. I grew up believing I was unwanted. And then I learned the truth, that he'd searched for me for years, that he'd died still looking. I didn't know what to do with that. How to reconcile the father my mother described with the man the records showed. He loved you, Marnie said, tears streaming down her face. I've read his journals. He never stopped loving you, never stopped hoping you'd come home. I know that now. But I needed to be sure before I claimed anything. Needed to know if there really was a sister out there, or if this was some elaborate fraud. So I came to North Carolina, investigated quietly. And then I saw your posts, your search for me, and I knew it was real. Where are you now? About 5 miles from your cabin. I've been working up the courage to knock on your door for 3 days. Emily squeezed Marnie's hand hard. Come now, Marnie said. Please, come meet your sister. 20 minutes later, a truck pulled into Marnie's driveway, the same one Judith had described, Montana plates dusty from mountain roads. Marnie stood on the porch with Emily beside her, Tucker at her feet. The moment felt suspended, fragile as morning frost. The man who stepped out of the truck was tall, broad-shouldered, with James Lockwood's features etched clearly in his face. Grey touched his temples, and lines around his eyes spoke of years lived in mountain sun and wind. He moved with careful deliberation, as if approaching something wild that might bolt. They stood looking at each other across the space of the yard, 2 strangers, connected by blood and loss and a father who'd loved them both from different kinds of distance. You have his eyes, Michael said finally, his voice rough. James's eyes. I've stared at his photographs so many times, and now I see them looking back at me. You have his build, Marnie replied. His way of standing, like you're rooted to the ground. The observation broke something in both of them. Michael's face crumpled, and Marnie found herself moving down the steps, crossing the yard. They met in the middle. Two middle-aged people who were brother and sister, who'd lived entire lives not knowing the other existed. The hug was awkward at first, then fierce. Michael was crying openly now, and Marnie felt her own tears soaking into his jacket. Emily watched from the porch, her own face wet. When they finally pulled apart, Michael wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I'm sorry. I didn't expect." "Neither did I," Marnie said. "Come inside. Please, we have so much to talk about." In the cabin, Emily made coffee while Marnie and Michael sat at the kitchen table. Tucker, after careful investigation, had accepted Michael as friend and now dozed at his feet. The artifacts were still spread across the table. James's journals, the photographs, the birth certificate. Michael picked up a photo of himself as a toddler with James. "I don't remember him at all. I was so young when we left. My mother..." He set the photo down carefully. "She told me he didn't want us, that he'd found someone else and pushed us away. I grew up believing I wasn't good enough for my own father." "That's not what happened," Marnie said gently. She pushed James's journals toward him. "He searched for you, for years. He never stopped loving you." Michael opened the journal with shaking hands, reading his father's words. Minutes passed in silence, except for the occasional turning of pages. Finally he looked up, his expression transformed by grief and wonder. "He looked for me. All those years he looked, until the day he died," Marnie confirmed. And then Vernon Hayes, his attorney, continued the search. "They never gave up," Emily set coffee mugs in front of them. "Your mother changed your names, made it nearly impossible to trace you. Why would she do that?" Michael ran his hand through his hair. "She was paranoid, always moving, always afraid someone would find us. I didn't understand when I was young. I thought it was normal. But as I got older, I realized something was wrong. She'd fly into rages if I asked about my father, about why we had no family. When I turned 18, I tried to search on my own, but I didn't even know my real last name then. She didn't tell me until she was dying, and even then it was out of spite. She said, 'Your father's name was James Lockwood, and he never wanted you.' So you believed her," Marnie said. "I wanted to. It was easier than thinking she'd stolen me away from someone who loved me. But I had to know for sure. So I started researching, found the court records, the trust documents, discovered James had died still searching. And then I found out about you, about a sister I never knew existed. He never stopped loving either of us," Marnie said, spreading out the artifacts. "Look, he kept everything. Your baby things, photographs, all of it protected in that shelter up on Hawk's Watch. He wanted us to know him, even though he couldn't be there." Michael examined each item with the careful attention of someone handling sacred objects. When he found the pocket watch, he held it to his ear out of habit. "It doesn't run." "No, but the note says it was his father's, your grandfather's." "Our grandfather's," Michael corrected softly, meeting her eyes. "We're family, Marnie. Real family." Emily poured more coffee, then sat down with them. "So what happens now? With the trust, the land, all of it?" Michael pulled papers from his jacket pocket, legal documents that looked official. "I contacted Vernon Hayes 2 days ago. Told him who I was, provided proof. These are the DNA results comparing my genetic markers to relatives Vernon located. I'm definitely James Lockwood's son." "Vernon didn't tell me," Marnie said, surprised. "I asked him not to. I wanted to meet you first, to see if..." He hesitated. "To see if you'd want to share. The trust is valuable, Marnie. More valuable than you might realize. Those mineral deposits Vernon mentioned? I've done the surveys. We're talking about significant rare earth elements. Millions of dollars in potential extraction rights. I don't want to mine it," Marnie said immediately. "James wanted the land protected. So do I. That's my whole career, keeping wild places wild. But there are others who know about those deposits. By asking questions at the county office, your search posts online, we've drawn attention. There are people in this area who've been waiting for the trust to resolve so they can make offers." "What kind of offers?" "The kind backed by mining companies with deep pockets and lawyers who specialize in breaking conservation trusts. I've seen it before. They find loopholes, pressure heirs, sometimes intimidate them into selling." Emily looked alarmed. "Are we in danger?" Not physically, probably, but legally, financially, yes. Once we claim the trust, once it becomes public record that we're James's heirs, the pressure will start. Offers, then better offers, then legal challenges to the conservation clauses. It's how these companies work. Marnie felt a chill despite the warmth of the cabin. What do? We claim the trust together. Both of us, unified. We create an ironclad conservation easement that prevents any development or mining. And we do it quickly, before anyone can file competing claims or legal challenges. Michael pulled out more papers. I've drafted documents. I'm a land attorney. This is what I do. If we both sign, if we both commit to protecting the land the way James wanted, no mining company can touch it. But you'd be giving up millions, Marnie protested. Michael, that money could change your life. My life doesn't need changing. I've work I love, enough money to live comfortably. What I didn't have was family, was connection to my father, was understanding of where I came from. This land, he gestured toward the mountains beyond the window. This is my inheritance. Not money, but place, identity. The same thing it is for you. Marnie looked at Emily, who nodded encouragement. Then she looked at the journals, at James's careful handwriting, documenting his love for both his children. He'd wanted them to have the land, wanted it protected. This was how they could honor that. What do we need to do? Michael spread the documents on the table, explaining each one with professional clarity. The trust acknowledgement, the conservation easement, the partnership agreement between siblings. Emily read over everything carefully, asking questions that showed her counselor's training in spotting emotional manipulation or coercion. But there was none. Michael was straightforward, even generous in his proposals. The land would be owned equally, but Marnie could continue living in the cabin, rent-free for life. Decisions about the property would be made jointly. Any revenue from sustainable timber harvesting or recreational leasing would be split fairly after covering maintenance costs. You've thought of everything, Emily observed. I've been thinking about nothing else for 2 years. Since I discovered James discovered this was waiting. I've imagined meeting my sister 1,000 times. Michael's voice softened. I've imagined having family. You do now, Marnie said firmly. Whatever happens with the land, with the trust, you're my brother. That doesn't change. They worked through the afternoon, reading documents, asking questions, making sure they understood every legal detail. Vernon Hayes arrived at 5, summoned by Michael's call. The elderly attorney looked between them with satisfaction. James would be so proud. Both his children together protecting what he loved. This is exactly what he hoped for. There's just one thing, Marnie said. The acknowledgement. We have to legally declare James as our father. Public record. What about the man who raised me? How do I honor him while claiming James? Vernon's expression was understanding. You can acknowledge both truths. James was your biological father, but the man who raised you was your father in every way that mattered. The legal acknowledgement doesn't erase that. It simply recognizes the biological reality that makes this trust valid. Michael reached across the table and took Marnie's hand. We can add a dedication to both fathers, James, who gave us life and land, and to the man who raised you with love, despite knowing you weren't his blood. Both deserve to be honored. Marnie felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. Yes, that's perfect. They signed the documents as sunset painted the mountains gold and crimson. Emily witnessed, Vernon notarized, and Tucker dozed peacefully through the whole proceeding. When the last signature was in place, Vernon gathered the papers with careful hands. I'll file these tomorrow morning. By noon, you'll be the legal owners of the Lockwood Trust lands, and the conservation easement will ensure they remain protected in perpetuity. He paused. There will be pushback. Mining companies, developers. They'll try to find ways to challenge this. Are you prepared for that? We're prepared, Michael said firmly. This is what we both do. I protect land legally. Marnie protects it by living on it, being its steward. Together, we're stronger than any mining company. After Vernon left, the three of them, Marnie, Michael, and Emily, sat on the porch, watching darkness settle over the mountains. Somewhere out there was Hawk's Watch, the shelter James had built. The listening tree where Tucker had dug up the box that started everything. 200 acres of wilderness that had waited 40 years for its rightful owners to come home. Stay tonight, Marnie offered. Both of you. We can make plans, figure out next steps. I'd like that, Michael said. I've been in hotel rooms for 3 days. A family home sounds good. Family home. The words resonated in Marnie's chest. This cabin had always been home, but now it meant something deeper. It was where two siblings had found each other, where past and present had finally aligned. They made dinner together, simple food that tasted extraordinary because of the company. They talked late into the night, filling in decades of separate histories, finding unexpected commonalities. Michael's love of hiking, his years working in wilderness areas. Marnie's painting, her need for solitude. Both of them drawn to mountains, to wild places, to the kind of peace that came from standing on high ground and seeing forever. Around midnight, Emily excused herself to bed. Marnie and Michael stayed on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the November cold. "Thank you for not fighting me on the trust," Michael said quietly. "I half expected you to challenge my claim, to say I'd waited too long or didn't deserve it. You're James's son. Of course you deserve it. And honestly, sharing this, it feels right. Less lonely. I know what you mean. I've been alone most of my life. Never married, no kids. The land was my family. But now," he gestured between them, "now I have a sister, niece, real family." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the forest. An owl called. The wind moved through the pines. Tucker snored softly from his bed just inside the door. "Tomorrow starts the hard part," Michael said eventually. "Once those documents are filed, the offers will start coming. Pressure from developers, mining companies. We need to be ready for that. We will be. Together." "Together," Michael agreed, and in that word Marnie heard the echo of James's hope finally fulfilled. His children united, his land protected, his love vindicated across 40 years of separation. The offers started arriving before the ink was dry on the filed documents. By noon the next day, Vernon's office had received 3 phone calls from land development companies. By evening, a certified letter waited at Marnie's mailbox, an offer from Apex Mining Corporation for $2 million. Contingent on mineral extraction rights, Michael read the letter with grim recognition. This is just the opening move. They start with money, see if that works. When it doesn't, they'll try other approaches. "What kind of approaches?" Emily asked. She delayed her return to Asheville, sensing this was important. Legal challenges to the conservation easement. Claims that the trust was improperly structured. Sometimes they find distant relatives who might have competing claims. They're very good at finding pressure points. As if summoned by his words, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. A man in an expensive suit emerged, carrying a briefcase and wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Elwood." "Mr. Barrett, my name is Preston Wade. I represent Consolidated Resource Development. I was hoping we could talk about your recent property acquisition." Michael stepped forward, positioning himself between Wade and the porch. "And we're not interested in selling." Of course. I respect that. But perhaps you'd be willing to hear about a partnership opportunity. CRD specializes in sustainable extraction, minimal environmental impact, maximum financial return. We could structure something that preserves most of the land while accessing the mineral deposits in a responsible way. "No," Marnie said from the porch. "Our father wanted this land protected. That means no mining, no extraction, no development." Wade's smile thinned. "Your father, that would be James Lockwood, deceased 1985. I've reviewed the trust documents. Fascinating reading. Did you know there's an ambiguity in the conservation language? Our legal team believes it could be interpreted to allow limited commercial use." "Your legal team is wrong," Michael said. His voice had gone flat, professional. "I wrote the conservation easement myself. There are no ambiguities. The land is protected absolutely. Now, yes. You're an attorney yourself, aren't you, Mr. Barrett? Specializing in conservation law." "Quite the coincidence." Wade's tone suggested it was anything but. "Tell me, have you disclosed to your sister that conservation easements can be challenged?" modified, even dissolved under certain circumstances. Don't try to intimidate us with legal threats, Emily said sharply. We have representation, Wade turned his smile on her. And you must be the daughter. Emily, isn't it? School counselor in Asheville? Impressive work, by the way. I understand you're quite dedicated to your students. The implication hung in the air. We know about you. We know how to reach you. Tucker growled low in his throat. The first time Marnie had heard him make that sound, Michael's jaw tightened. Mr. Wade, you need to leave now. Of course, I'll leave this information packet. Look it over. You'll find our offer is quite generous, considerably more than the $2 million from Apex. We're talking about enough money to change your lives, to set up trusts for future generations. All for land you can't really use anyway, stuck as it is under that conservation easement. He set a thick envelope on the porch railing. We'll be in touch. After he drove away, they stood in tense silence. Emily picked up the envelope and opened it, pulling out glossy brochures and financial projections. $6 million, she read. Split between you two, that's $3 million each. Mom, that's retirement security. College funds for grandchildren. Never worrying about money again. I know, Marnie said quietly. But it's not what James wanted. He could have sold those mineral rights when he was alive, could have made himself rich. He chose not to. He chose to protect this land instead. What if we're wrong? Emily pressed. What if holding on to this land out of sentiment means missing the chance to do real good with that money? Charitable foundations, scholarships, actual help for actual people. Michael sat heavily on the porch steps. She's not wrong, Marnie. We could do a lot of good with $6 million. Fund conservation work all over the country. Help families keep their land. The question is, does protecting this specific 200 acres matter more than all the good we could do elsewhere? It was the doubt Marnie had been pushing away since the offers started. James had wanted the land protected, yes, but he'd also wanted to provide for his children. Would he want them to turn down life-changing money? Would he want them to struggle financially when they could be secure? She looked at Tucker, who'd settled back into watchful alertness, at Emily, who was genuinely trying to help her think clearly, and Michael, who'd devoted his career to conservation, but now faced the reality of what that devotion cost. I need to think, she said finally. We all do. This is too big a decision to make under pressure. That's what Wade is counting on, Michael warned. The doubt, the second-guessing. These companies are experts at making you question what you know is right. Vernon arrived an hour later, summoned by Michael's call. He listened to their account of Wade's visit with increasing concern. Preston Wade, he said when they finished. I know that name. He's been involved in several controversial developments in Appalachia. His companies have a reputation for finding legal loopholes, pressuring landowners, sometimes worse. If he's personally involved, they're serious about getting this land. Should we be worried? Emily asked. You should be careful. Wade operates in gray areas, nothing overtly illegal, but definitely ethically questionable. He'll look for any weakness in your trust documents, your easement, your claim to the property, and he'll use whatever he finds. Marnie felt the weight of her mother's secrets pressing down again. How many other secrets were there? What other vulnerabilities might exist that Wade's lawyers could exploit? Vernon, is there anything at all that could invalidate the trust? Any claim someone could make? The old attorney was quiet for a long moment. There is one thing, something I've kept to myself all these years, because I thought it was buried safely in the past. But if Wade starts digging deep enough, he might find it. The cabin seemed to grow smaller as Vernon's words hung in the air. Marnie felt her chest tightened. What is it? Vernon pulled out his briefcase and withdrew a folder she hadn't seen before, older, more worn than the trust documents. When James created the trust, he had to prove paternity for legal purposes. DNA testing wasn't available then, not like now. But he provided medical records, blood type information, documentation of his relationship with your mother. All of it was filed with the court under seal. That's standard procedure, Michael said. I've seen dozens of paternity cases. The sealed records protect privacy. Yes, but here's the complication. Your mother was still married when you were born, Marnie. Legally, under North Carolina law at the time, that meant her husband was presumed to be the father. James could have challenged that presumption, forced a legal determination of paternity. But he didn't, because it would have required your mother to testify, would have made the affair public record. So the trust was created without legally establishing James as my father? Marnie felt cold. Not exactly. James provided enough evidence to satisfy me and the initial judge who approved the trust structure. But we did it quietly through sealed proceedings. If someone challenged it now, demanded those records be opened and reviewed with modern standards, they could argue the trust was improperly established. Michael finished. That without definitive proof of paternity, James had no legal right to create a trust for Marnie. But we can do DNA testing now, Emily protested. Prove it conclusively. We can, Vernon agreed, but a challenge could tie the trust up in court for years. During that time, the land would be in legal limbo. And if Wade's company has done their research, and I'm sure they have, they know that legal limbo is when pressure works best. When people are tired, when legal bills mount, when the easy solution starts looking very attractive. Marnie stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains that had suddenly become a battleground. What do? We get ahead of it, Michael said. He was already pulling out his phone, making notes. We do the DNA test now, file it proactively. Establish paternity beyond any doubt before Wade can challenge it. That's not enough, Vernon said quietly. The trust documents themselves could be challenged as improperly constructed under 1983 law. I was young then, doing my best to honor a friend's wishes while protecting everyone's privacy. But I may have cut corners that seemed reasonable then, but wouldn't hold up now. The admission cost him. Marnie could see it in the way his shoulders sagged. He'd carried this uncertainty for 40 years, hoping it would never matter. Then we don't just defend, Marnie said, turning back from the window. We rebuild. Michael, can you create a new trust? One that's absolutely bulletproof under current law? Yes, but it would require... He stopped, understanding. It would require us to acknowledge everything publicly. The affair, the paternity, all of it. No sealed records, no privacy protections. Complete transparency, which is exactly what my mother feared. What she tried so hard to prevent. Marnie felt the weight of her mother's secrets pressing down. But the secrecy is what's making us vulnerable. Wade knows we're trying to hide something, and that gives him power. Emily moved to stand beside her mother. Grandma made her choices for her time. But this is your time, Mom, your choice. And sometimes the bravest thing is to tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Marnie looked at Michael. This brother she'd known for barely a day, but who already felt like family. What do you think? I think James wanted us to know the truth. He built that shelter, kept those journals, specifically so we'd understand who he was and what happened. Maybe the real gift he left wasn't just the land. Maybe it was the chance to live honestly, without the burden of secrets. Vernon was nodding slowly. I can prepare new documents. Full disclosure, modern legal standards, DNA evidence on file. It'll take a few weeks to properly structure, but when we're done, there won't be any vulnerabilities for Wade to exploit. Do it, Marnie said. And I want everything unsealed. The old records, the sealed proceedings, all of it. Let people know the truth. My mother had an affair. James Lockwood was my father. The man who raised me knew and loved me anyway. Those are the facts. I'm not ashamed of them anymore. Michael stood and extended his hand to her. Then we face this together, as family, as James's children protecting what he loved. She took his hand, feeling the strength in his grip. Together, Vernon began gathering papers, preparing to file the necessary motions. Emily made calls to arrange DNA testing appointments. Michael started drafting the new trust documents on his laptop. And Marnie sat down to write something she'd never imagined she'd need to write. A public statement explaining her parentage, her inheritance, and her commitment to protecting the land James had left them. The words came easier than she'd expected. Perhaps because they were true. Perhaps because she'd finally stopped running from her own history. 2 days later, Preston Wade returned. This time he had 2 other men with him, lawyers, clearly, with their expensive suits and calculated expressions. Marnie and Michael met them in the yard, Vernon standing behind them like a guardian. Wade's smile was gone. "I see you've been busy. New trust documents filed. DNA tests completed. Public statements to the press about your father's legacy. Very clever." "We're not trying to be clever," Marnie said. "We're simply claiming what's ours and protecting what James wanted protected. Noble, but impractical. Ms. Elwood, Mr. Barrett, let me be frank. We know about the sealed records. We know the original trust was questionable. We have lawyers who can tie this up for a decade if necessary. You'll spend more on legal fees than the land is worth, then you'll spend just as much," Michael countered. "And I work for free. This is personal for me. How long can your company justify hemorrhaging money on legal fees for land you might never access?" Wade's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake. Both of you. That land is worth millions. The minerals alone are staying in the ground," Marnie interrupted, "where James wanted them, where they belong. We're not selling, not negotiating, not compromising. You can challenge us legally if you want, but you'll lose," one of Wade's lawyers stepped forward. "We've reviewed your new trust documents. They're tight, I'll give you that. But there's always another approach. Public opinion, for instance. How do you think the local community will feel when they learn you're sitting on millions that could create jobs? Fund schools? You'll be seen as selfish outsiders, preventing economic development. I've lived here my whole life," Marnie said quietly. "These are my people, and they understand that some things matter more than money, like keeping these mountains wild for the next generation." Vernon spoke up for the first time. "Gentlemen, my clients have made their position clear. Unless you have new information or a legitimate legal challenge, this conversation is over." Wade stared at them for a long moment, calculating. Then he nodded to his lawyers and turned to leave. At his truck he paused. "You think you've won, but this isn't over. There are other ways to get what we want. You might want to remember that." After they left, Emily exhaled shakily. "Was that a threat?" "Probably," Michael said. "But it was also an admission of weakness. They don't have a legal angle, so they're resorting to intimidation. Which means we've won the important battle." Vernon was less certain. "Wade doesn't give up easily. Stay vigilant. Document any further contact. And Marnie, consider installing security cameras around the property." That night, as Emily drove back to Asheville and Michael settled into the guest room that would become his when he visited, Marnie sat on the porch with Tucker. The mountains stretched dark against the stars, ancient and enduring. She'd claimed her inheritance, found her brother, stood up to those who wanted to exploit what James had protected. The truth was out, messy and complicated and real, and somehow, despite everything, she felt lighter than she had in years. Spring came to the mountains with its usual fanfare, dogwoods blooming white against the green, wildflowers carpeting the meadows, the creek running high and cold with snowmelt. 6 months had passed since Tucker had dug up that box beneath the listening tree. 6 months since Marnie's world had been rewritten by secrets finally revealed. She stood now at Hawk's Watch with Michael and Emily, watching a stonemason set the final piece of the memorial they'd commissioned. A simple bench, carved from local granite, positioned to face the view James had loved. The inscription read, "James Lockwood, 1947 to 1985. He loved these mountains and the children he couldn't hold. His legacy lives in the land he protected and the family he brought together." Judith Mercer was there, having driven up from the valley. Vernon Hayes, too, despite his age and the difficult hike. Roy Dalton had closed the general store for the afternoon to attend. A small gathering of people who'd known James, or known of him, or simply understood what this memorial meant. "I'm glad you added that last part," Judith said, touching the inscription. "About bringing family together. That's what he did, even from beyond the grave. He had help," Marnie said, glancing at Michael. "From people who kept faith with him." Vernon settled onto the new bench with a satisfied sigh. "I'm relieved to see this finally happen. 40 years is a long time to carry someone else's hopes." "You did more than carry them," Michael said. "You protected them, made them possible. We owe you everything." The old attorney waved this away, but Marnie could see his pleasure in the acknowledgement. He devoted half his life to honoring a promise to a friend, and now that promise had borne fruit. They'd planted an oak sapling near the bench, a descendant of the listening tree, grown from an acorn Emily had collected. It would take decades to reach maturity, but that was fitting. This land measured time in generations, not seasons. After the ceremony, after the others had hiked back down and only Marnie, Michael and Emily remained, they walked the property together. The conservation easement had held. Wade's company had finally given up after 3 months of failed legal challenges. Other mining interests had made offers, all refused. The land was protected now, truly and permanently. "I want to show you something," Michael said, leading them to the eastern boundary. There, hidden in a grove of hemlocks, he'd begun building a small cabin. "I'm thinking of relocating. Montana's beautiful, but this is where my roots are, where family is. If it's all right with you, I'd like to live here part of the year. Help manage the land, be closer to my sister." Marnie felt warmth spread through her chest. "I'd like that, more than you know, and I could visit more often," Emily added. "Maybe bring someone to meet you both." She smiled, shy suddenly. "I've been seeing someone. It's new, but it feels serious. I'd like you to know him. We'd love to meet him," Marnie said, pulling her daughter into a hug. How many years had they spent at arm's length, polite but distant? The truth, painful as it had been, had somehow brought them closer. Shared secrets became shared strength. They walked back to the main cabin as afternoon faded toward evening. Tucker, slower now but still game, led the way as he always had. Inside, Marnie had prepared dinner. Nothing fancy, just roasted chicken and vegetables from the garden she'd expanded this spring. They ate on the porch, watching the mountains take on their sunset colors. "Have you thought about what you'll do with the timber rights?" Michael asked. "There's sustainable harvest potential. Not much, but enough to cover property taxes and maintenance. I've thought about it. James's journals mention he used to sell select trees to a local sawmill. Maybe we could do the same. Keep it small, keep it careful. I know some foresters who could help us develop a management plan. 20-year rotation, minimal impact." They talked logistics for a while, practical matters of land stewardship, financial planning, long-term conservation. But beneath the practicalities ran deeper currents of connection, of purpose, of lives intertwined through loss and rediscovery. Later, after Emily had gone to bed and Michael had returned to his hotel, his cabin wouldn't be finished for months yet, Marnie sat alone on the porch with Tucker. She held the photograph of young James Lockwood, the one from the box, studying his face in the lamplight. "Thank you," she whispered to the image, to the memory, to whatever remained of the man who'd loved her before she was born. "Thank you for the land, for the truth, for Michael, for not giving up on hope." The wind carried the scent of pine and earth and growing things. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. Tucker's breathing had settled into the rhythm of sleep. Marnie thought about her mother, about the weight of secrets she'd carried, the fear that had driven her to bury the truth rather than speak it. She understood that fear now, understood the desperate desire to protect those you loved even if protection meant lies. But she also understood what her mother hadn't. That truth, even difficult truth, was lighter than deception. That bringing things into the light, however painful, allowed them to heal. She'd started painting again, really painting, not just dabbing at canvases when the mood struck. Her latest work hung inside, a large canvas showing the listening tree at dawn, its roots reaching deep into earth, its branches reaching toward sky. In the foreground, barely visible, 2 figures stood hand in hand, brother and sister, James's children, finally home. The painting was promised to the local historical society, which had asked to mount an exhibition about James Lockwood and the trust that had protected 200 acres of wilderness for 40 years. The story had spread through the valley, not as scandal, but as testament to complicated love and lasting legacy. People understood, more than Marnie had expected. They saw what she saw. That James had been a good man who'd made difficult choices, that her mother had tried to protect what mattered most, that the man who'd raised her had been a quiet hero. The truth had room for all of it, for the mess and grace of actual human lives. Tomorrow, Michael would return from filing paperwork to establish a scholarship fund in James's name for students pursuing conservation careers. They'd endowed it with profits from a small timber sale, money earned from the land used to help others protect land elsewhere. It felt right, felt like completing a circle James had begun. Marnie rose, her joints protesting slightly. 63 now and feeling it some days, but feeling it with gratitude, with awareness of how precious each day was. She helped Tucker to his feet. His arthritis made stairs difficult now, and they went inside together. In her bedroom, she arranged the artifacts on a shelf Vernon had helped her install. The box, the letters, the photographs. James's journals, his pocket watch, Michael's baby bracelet. The map that had started everything. Each item a piece of a story that had waited 4 decades to be told. She picked up the letter her mother had written, reading it again as she did most nights. The words no longer hurt the way they had initially. Now they felt like bridge between past and present, between fear and courage, between the woman her mother had been and the woman Marnie had become. "I understand," she whispered to her mother's memory. "I forgive you. I hope you forgive yourself." She turned out the light and lay in the darkness, Tucker's soft breathing a comfort beside her. Through the window, stars scattered across the mountain sky. The same stars James had seen, the same mountains her mother had loved, the same land that would endure long after all of them were gone, protected by decisions made in love and faith and hope. Some secrets, Marnie had learned, were meant to stay buried, but others needed air and light to transform from burden into blessing. The difference was in knowing which was which, and having courage enough to dig deep when necessary. Tucker stirred, made the small sound that meant he was dreaming. Marnie reached down to touch his graying fur, grounding herself in his warmth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Land always did, requiring attention and care and constant vigilance. But tonight, she could rest in the knowledge that she'd honored James's legacy, found her brother, claimed her truth. The mountains held her in their ancient peace. The land stretched dark and wild beyond her windows, protected now and forever. And somewhere in the space between waking and sleep, Marnie heard it, a whisper on the wind that might have been imagination or might have been something more. "Welcome home." She smiled into the darkness and let sleep take her, knowing that she was exactly where she belonged, where she'd always belonged even when she didn't know it. Home in the mountains her father had loved, on the land her brother now shared, surrounded by truth that had finally, after 4 decades of silence, found its voice. The story wasn't ending. It was just beginning, a new chapter written by children who'd inherited not just land, but the courage to protect it, the wisdom to share it, and the love that made any inheritance worth keeping. James Lockwood's legacy lived on, not in the money they'd refused or the minerals they'd left buried, but in family found and truth spoken and mountains kept wild for generations yet to come. And that, Marnie thought as she drifted into dreams, was exactly what he'd hoped for.